It was very funny. I was speaking at one event, and somebody asked me in the back to please turn the microphone down. I wasn't using a microphone. It's very bad. That's very bad. Bonsoir. Bonsoir. I am very pleased to be here. They always say never start a presentation with an apology. But I'm embarrassed that I spent more of my time, I counted up this year how many days I've spent in France, and compared them to how many days I've spent in Arizona, which is where my husband and I moved to this year. And I discovered I've been in France more than I've been in Arizona, and I still don't speak French. So I apologize. Typical American, speak one language. It is my pleasure to be here with Azilia, and my compliments and my thanks to FLUX for being the organization that really started this whole process well over a year ago of bringing this new information to France. And I'll share another interesting story since we're all here in the family. I just came from Holland, and the Dutch asked me, they said, where is the leading edge? Where is it that we're seeing the most instructors and the most classes and the most interest in DDMRP? And I said, well, it's very clear. It's France. You're going to appreciate the response from the Dutch. They said, how could that be? But it really is. And I'm very pleased to bring this message to you tonight. This is a presentation. It's very interesting for me to be here because before moving to Arizona, I lived in Washington State. For those of you in the aerospace industry, you'll recognize that that's the home of Boeing. And the presentation I'm going to do tonight, I also did for the Washington Governors Conference on aerospace in Washington. And they were looking at manufacturing, they were looking at medical devices, aerospace, and maritime. And it's always interesting because you can never be an expert in your own hometown. So I got invited to speak at the Washington Governors Conference immediately after I moved to Arizona. So there's truth to that. So what we're going to talk about tonight is how do we achieve a sustainable competitive advantage in today's very complicated, complex supply chain. Things have changed, have they not? Yes? All right. We're going to look at what we call deep truth. And a deep truth is something that absolutely everybody believes. So, would you agree, we tend to believe that if I can only reduce cost, I will improve my return on investment. Yes? Right. You know what we also call a deep truth? What if that deep truth, the thing that we're all operating under, is absolutely and unequivocally false? You think back to the deep truth during the time of Copernicus, Galileo, everybody believed the Earth was the center of the universe. The Catholic Church excommunicated those two. They were almost murdered because they dared say that the sun is the center of the universe. In 1492, when Columbus sailed from Spain, where did everybody think he was going? Either they were going to find India, or he was going to fall off the face of the world. Because everybody knew the world was flat. Well, let's look at these trips. Let's look at this deep truth. To understand this, we really need to examine two key principles of supply chain. The first is what we call the first law of manufacturing. This was first written by George Plossel in the early 1990s when he wrote the second edition of Orlicky's MRP book. And he said that all benefits, all return on investment, is directly related to the speed of flow of materials and information. Well, we know that information flows back to us from our customer. We have material and information flowing to our customer. And what comes back to us is cash. The caveat to this rule is both the materials and the information has to be relevant. Well, what are the benefits that we're looking at? Well, the benefits include service. Our customers want what they want, when they want it, at a price they want to pay. And now, given today's global economy, if you can't provide it, they go someplace else. revenue is maximized and protected when there's good flow, as is service. Inventories are minimized. Because why do we carry inventory? Because things are not flowing well. Expenses. As things flow better, the ancillary expenses are minimized. Cash flow. Cash is king. Companies are critical on cash flow, and for many small companies, cash flow is more important than profitability. So if we protect and promote flow, we get a return on investment maximization. Now, as we look at these different departments, we tend to think of these departments as fighting with each other. If we look at planning, planning wants to have predictable, accurate forecasts, right? But what do we know? Forecasts are always wrong. What does sales want? They want manufacturing to be able to build what the customer orders, when they order it, and they want it delivered. They forecast how many euros they're going to sell, and they get frustrated when operations doesn't deliver it. When we look at marketing, what does marketing want? They want a lot of new products going to the marketplace. Quality wants good items flowing through the plant. So it seems that with these different departments are fighting each other, that so many times we come into conflict and we have silos that are fighting with each other. But when we really look at it, what we see is the one thing that unites them is flow. Because when things flow well, planning is easier. When things flow well, it's easier to account for things. When things flow well, sales is easier, because I can promise things. When things flow well, marketing is easier. Well, where else did this flow thing come from? Is it just from Carol Ptak and Demand-Driven Institute? Well, let's look at some other people that have talked about flow. Who's this guy? It's Teiichi Ono. He's the gentleman that developed the Toyota production system. What did he talk about? He talked about the reduction of waste. And the reduction of waste for the purpose of doing what? Improving flow. So he was doing this during the turnaround of Toyota. Well, who's this? It's an Israeli physicist named Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. Wrote the book The Goal, or the book in French. And what did he talk about? Improving throughput. How do I improve throughput? By improving flow. Well, I'd be a very poor American if I didn't put an American up here too, right? Got to have the token American on the page. But it was an American that the American management team never listened to. This is W. Edwards Deming. The highest award in Japan is still the Deming Award. And what did he focus on? How do we reduce variability for the purposes of improving flow? So if Ono's writing about it, Goldratt's writing about it, and Deming's writing about it, there must be something to this flow thing. So let's look at some historical reference. Well, if we look right after 1929, there was something that happened in the United States on October 19th, 1929. Anybody have an idea what it was other than my mother's birthday? Which it really is. Her birthday is really on October 19th, 1929. What else? That was the stock market crash that started the Great Depression in my country. Well, because of the stock market crash, there was no way at that time to compare companies against each other. So the government stepped in and we created something called Generally Accepted Accounting Practice. The Securities Exchange Commission came up with a process to be able to compare companies. And the GAAP principles were born. They've been adopted in different formats, but around the world. What's interesting is in 1965, material requirements planning revolutionized the way that we were planning materials. Well, in 1972, we had enough power to close the loop from material planning to capacity planning. And in 1980, we had enough power to now add in the financial systems, and we were in the age of MRP2, Manufacturing Resource Planning. So the manufacturing systems became the way to capture all this information and have the reporting come out. Well, now about 1990, we got into client server, and MRP2 evolved into ERP. Still the financial, the material, the the ability to manage all the resources of an enterprise. So most managers, and even accountants, because remember, this thing started in 1934. Where are we now? 80 years later, have come to accept GAAP costing as relevant information. Really? What's the trouble with that? Well, the trouble with that is companies are acting today as if cost is undeniably the first law of management. So what happens? All reporting, all measures, all tactical planning and execution is looking at what I like to call the Holy Trinity, which is improved efficiency, utilization, and overhead absorption for the purposes of what? Reducing cost. We're striving for overhead variances to make it look like we're more profitable. So, what are the consequences? Let's take a look at this. If plants feel the pressure to maximize our monthly profit plan, in other words, we want to improve our cost of goods sold dollar credit as a key performance indicator, right? And do you believe that people behave how they're measured? That's something out of Deming. He said, watch how you measure me, because that's how I will behave. Right? Well, if you believe that the plants are feeling pressure to minimize their cost of goods sold, well then an unavoidable consequence is that the plants are trying to maximize making the high COGS dollar. In other words, the things that the plant is going to get better value credited to them. Well, what happens? Well, some items have higher dollars that they earn than others. So what happens? Well, we're not stupid. I grew up on the shop floor. All right, so what did we do? If you give me a choice of orders to build, I'm going to pick the orders that are the high COGS items. The items that are going to earn me the highest value. Well, what happens? Well, some items, some make-to-stock items that occur stockouts because I can't build them. I don't want to build them. I was distribution manager for a company out of Rochester, New York called Bausch & Lomb. I was the distribution manager. I was responsible for shipping things. I had all the customer orders I needed to make my monthly revenue. Problem is I didn't have the product. So being the shy person I was, I went to the production person and said, why haven't you made this? He said, not going to make it. I said, are you short parts? He said, no. He said, I'm held to 120% efficiency. And the standard is wrong on those parts. And the best that I can do is 80% efficiency, so I'm not making any of those this month. I said, but I have orders for them. He said, your problem, not mine. True stories. Well, if setting up more, right, because what do we know? If we set up more, it increases our product unit cost, right? We know setup increases cost. So then what do we do? Well, if I earn efficiency based on our lot sizes, then I pull ahead orders and I build things ahead of time because I can save the setup. Well, if I do that, then what happens? Well, then I have some make-to-stock products that are what? Overstock. Let's increase the fund. Well, if I tend to produce things that I don't need, then I might have stuff that's overstocked as well. Well, then I give my plants credit when they ship stuff to distribution. So what do I want to do? I push everything out. So I tend to produce even though I don't have any orders, because I got to keep all my people busy. Well, so then I get overstock. Well, the problem is I have make-to-order part of my business, as well as make-to-stock part of my business, and they share common capacity and common materials. So then what happens? Well, if I'm pulling orders ahead so that I can be efficient, I now have upset purchasing, because purchasing only bought the material that I needed to build what I was supposed to build, but I built things that I wasn't supposed to build. So what ends up happening? My make-to-order backlogs grow, right? And we're shipping late. And what happens to our customers? Are they happy with us? No. So, what's that all go back to? It goes back down to this performance metric, right? So now, let's take these three things. This is fun. Take it down to the bottom. Here's the natural behaviors. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of how many companies in here have too much of the wrong stuff, too little of the right stuff, and overall have just too much stuff. Not going to ask for a show of hands. Don't want you to be embarrassed. All right. Well, what happens is that assuming that I have common labor and I got common materials, what happens? And if some make-to-stock products are overstocked, then what happens? I'm consuming my capacity unnecessarily. Well, what we do is we create bottlenecks. And they're artificial, because I really didn't need to do it. Well, then what do? Well, I've got a bottleneck, so what do I want to do? I feel pressure to add capital to add capacity. Well, but if I have things that are stocked out, and I feel pressure to meet our on-time KPI, our key performance indicator, then what happens? Well, then we move into expedite mode, right? That's what attracts us to operations. We're good problem solvers. So we feel pressure to expedite late work. Well, then if I do that, what happens? Well, then capacity is not always available because I'm rushing things through. Well, then what happens when that happens? Well, I feel pressure to add more capital because I don't have sufficient capacity. What also happens? I want to work overtime. Because I say I can't get it done in my regular time, I have to work overtime. Well, now if I have common raw materials and subcomponents, and those things are true, then I'm also not only consuming capacity unnecessarily, I'm consuming materials unnecessarily. Which means that my materials are not available when I need it. So we feel pressure to add more inventory. Go out. I was a buyer for a long time. Buy double. Stay out of trouble. So then, what do? We start beating on our suppliers, don't we? Oh, come on, you got to help me out. You got to ship this over. Put it on an airplane. Hurry it up. I'll pay you an expedite fee to get it in here because I need it ahead of time. Because I'm short, right? Because what? I was an old plant manager. Now, I was really good at expediting. Can you imagine I was good at getting stuff moved through the plant? I don't care how you get it done, just get it done. All right. And when you ask, how did you do that? You knew the wrong answer was, don't ask. You don't want to know. Okay? So and then you fly on it, right? Remember, I came out of aerospace industry, you just go, I don't want to know. All right, so what we do is when we're expediting, we do what? We emphasize speed. Remember, we always wanted to put stuff into the paint shop at night. Because it was amazing how much faster paint dried at night than it did during the day. There's a story behind that too. Anybody that knows Teflon paint knows that you can make it look like it's dry by applying talcum powder to it. So what happens? Quality problems, right? When we try to speed up, what happens? Quality problems increase. All right, now let's take a look. We all agreed that ROI is a good thing. Well, interesting. From just these things, what ends up happening to our on-time delivery? Goes down. Inventory goes up. Lead time, up. Cost, up. Revenue, down. All because we're focused on what? Cost. You say, how could this be? How could this be? I thought reducing cost was a good thing. So, here's the two competing first laws. The cost-centric metric is we feel pressure to maximize our monthly profit plan. And I visited a company while I was here in France. It was an interesting visit because they were telling me how they had to be efficient. So they were using all these materials and they had inventory stacked everywhere. And I asked them, I said, what percentage of your cost of goods sold is labor? And they said, we don't know. He said, yeah, you're lying to me, you do know. How much do you pay your people? Answer, €80 an hour. I said, really? I quit, I'm coming to France. That's a good rate. I said, now is that your fully loaded cost? Or is that actually what you pay the people? Well, they knew exactly, to the penny, exactly how much their product cost. Well, after I pulled out the material cost, and I pulled out the overhead out of the labor cost, guess what we discovered? Labor was about 8% of their total cost of goods sold. Material was about 55 to 60% of their total cost of goods sold. So, of course, what were they doing? Consuming the 60% to keep the 8% busy. Right? And it makes sense because what was the overriding goal? Cost. It's that generally accepted accounting practice. Now, if we look at flow, and we feel pressure to meet our on-time performance KPI, can you see where these two things get into conflict? I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. You see the problem? So let's look at the action. What's the first thing we look for? I got to be efficient, right? Well, in the cost-centric world, what do I want to do? I want to run bigger batches. In the flow-centric world, I want to protect my critical resources. I want to run smaller batches. For the margin, in the cost-centric world, I want to focus on lowering my unit product cost. In the flow-centric world, I want to focus on increasing my service level. In the cost-centric world, don't you love this when the boss comes along and says, you need to reduce inventory by 20%. So what do we focus on? Where do we reduce the inventory? The easiest place that it is to reduce the inventory, which is what? The products that are selling. So what do we end up with? Too little of the right stuff, right? Because the too much of the wrong stuff is not going anywhere anyway. On the flow, we want to commit to strategic stock positions to enable flow. Budgets. What do? We focus on actions to achieve a standard unit cost. Well, how do we play that game? Set the standard on a smaller batch, make a bigger batch, causes a variance, which means that it looks like you made money. The flow-centric, we want to focus on the cost of the incremental cost of leveraging flow. Cost-centric on volume, what do we want to do? We say if you order more, I'll reduce the price. Think about what that does to your plant. Think what it does to your customer's plant. Right? Your plant can't produce it well, the customer's plant can't absorb it well. But we keep doing it to ourselves over and over and over. On the flow-centric side, we focus on service, we focus on lead times, and we focus on reducing order minimums. How about continuous improvement? How do we measure continuous improvement? We measure it based on unit cost reductions. Flow, how do we measure? We identify the largest sources of variations. All right, so now let's look at relevance. Relevance is, what is it that really is important to my decision? These are costs and benefits that differ between alternatives. This is a book that was written back in 2008. Great book, Managerial Accounting for Managers. Because what happens when I consider irrelevant data? Irrelevant data can be ignored. Saves us a lot of time. The problem is, bad decisions can come from erroneously including irrelevant costs. Relevant range is the range within which we can make a decision. In the long run, all costs are variable. I can shut a plant down, I can move a plant, I can outsource, I can change suppliers. However, in the short run, all costs, including labor and resources and overhead, are fixed. So why should we consider them? So utilizing and unitizing fixed costs, will always lead us to an incorrect decision. So let's look at some ranges here. The ranges that we look at strategically, what's our metric? What really are we in business to do? Return on investment. This gets warped into cost reduction very quickly. And a lot of people believe, erroneously, that to get ROI, I have to focus on two things: revenue and cost. Just as true as the Earth is the center of the universe. Now we notice that on the strategic side, it's about ROI. As I get down into the monthly level, it's ROI and flow. Now, how does demand flow support us getting to return on investment? So, what overhead costs can really be affected by us that are in management? What really can we affect? What can we affect within a month? Within a week? Within a day? Right? What costs can we really affect? Those are the only costs that are truly relevant.